வெல்கம் பேக். ஐநாவினுடைய விசேட நிபுணர்களுடைய முக்கிய உறுப்பினர்களான ஜஸ்மின் சூக்கா அவர்களுடன் இலங்கையில் தற்போது காணப்பட்டு வரும் இடைக்கால நீதி நிர்வாகம் நீதி தொடர்பான அந்த பொறிமுறை தொடர்பாக அந்த நடைமுறை தொடர்பாக நாங்கள் இப்போது கலந்துரையாடி கொண்டிருக்கிறோம். Before the break, we were talking about the Office of the Missing Persons. That was one of the 4 pillars of the transitional justice process. Sri Lanka is doing that, isn't it?
It's ticking boxes. You know, the new government of Sri Lanka did something quite historic in the sense that last year in September they passed a consensus, or what we call a joint resolution, in the Human Rights Council. And in that resolution, they committed themselves to a transitional justice program and also committed themselves to setting up what they call a hybrid special court, which would also include what they call foreign or Commonwealth judges, investigators, and prosecutors. But the 4 mechanisms that they spoke about was a truth commission, this hybrid court, an office of missing persons, and then of course an office for reparations, which would also include a compassionate council. Now, of course, in September last year and now, the government has set up a large number, I think, of task groups and work groups, but you can't actually pinpoint who in the government has responsibility for this particular program. And that's one of the first challenges that I have, that unless you have one person who is responsible for it, and you have within government a structure that is responsible for this program.
We have seen that this is what
the military has a case to answer. If you read the panel of experts report, if you read the report of the OISL inquiry, if you read the Itjp's reports and reports of freedom from torture, the security forces have a case to answer. And so we need to know, the international community and Tamil citizens, at what point is the government seriously going to deal with this issue? Because right now they are ticking boxes, and the passing of this OMP bill is just another example of passing and ticking the box.
But the OMP, for the foreign leaders, the foreign community or the international community, at the UN especially, UN Human Rights Council session starts on the 13th, next Monday. But they will say that Sri Lankan government has established all this. They accept the reality. They said that we will do this, that and all that. And they have started the consultation process. One of the important elements of the transitional justice process is the Office of the Missing Person. The Prime Minister has set it up, and the Cabinet has approved. Now it's going to go to Parliament. And the key point, one of the important points in the Cabinet memorandum by the Prime Minister, is that the Office of the Missing Persons, the findings of the OMP, the Office of the Missing Person, will not give rise to the criminal and judicial prosecutions. What does that really mean?
Well, in a way, you're answering that question yourself, because in Sri Lanka, we are not just dealing with ordinary missing persons. We're not dealing with people who went missing during various parts of the conflict. What we are dealing specifically with is the question of the crime of an enforced disappearance. Sri Lanka recently ratified the convention, and what that means for them is that at a domestic level, they have to criminalize the question of enforced disappearances. Now, if you look at the language of the bill, and the first point they make is that this is not the body that will deal with criminal prosecutions. So which body is going to deal with the fact that the state and its surrogates, the paramilitaries, have been responsible for enforced disappearances? Because the difference between missing persons and enforced disappearances is that the one has intent on the part of the state to commit a crime, and here the state has to be prosecuted. The second thing that I read in the draft bill and in the memorandum is the fact that they use the word tracing. Now, of course, you trace missing persons, but you investigate the crime of enforced disappearances. And who is going to make sure that people have witness protection and security? Who will make sure that the investigators are independent of the existing state structures? Unless all of that is contained in the bill, what you're doing is you're ticking the box, but you have no intention of dealing with the criminal aspects of a crime of enforced disappearances. And that, of course, is a big problem for victims. If you look at our consultations, do you know what the victims said to us? We don't really care about anything else. We want justice. And we want criminal justice. We want the perpetrators of the crimes to be prosecuted. And we also want those who, the superiors and who held command, to be prosecuted as well. The second thing they said when we looked at the question of the work of the Truth Commission is they asked the question, why did the government blur the distinction between us, Tamil civilians, and combatants? Why did they then kill us and kill our people in that particular way? Then they make another very important question. They say, why did the international community abandon us? Why did they leave us to die? And people say, we want to know the truth about why all of these things happened. The other thing people talked about is they said, if we do not have an acknowledgement by the state that these were crimes committed against us, we don't want money for that, because that money, without the acknowledgement, will be meaningless. They also talked about the question, why do they continue to suffer persecution in their own country?
But this, when I talk about they don't want money, you said, but this government has approved another, cabinet has approved another important clause, is that issuing is a certificate of disappearances for the people who have disappeared. They have a certificate of absence. What does that mean for the people? Because for those who say we don't worry about anything else except justice.
It's a very tricky question, because you want to be very clear that in accepting that certificate that they issue, that will not compromise your right to bring a claim for damages against the state.
Is it a confirmation of confirmation that 65,000 people, which they say are missing after 1994, have been killed or died?
I think I think that the whole idea of the issuing of the certificate is perhaps a tool to allow people to get on with sort of their normal lives, because you always have insurance, you have property, all of those kind of things. But this is the thing that we need to look at. When they issue that certificate, does it compromise their rights? Their rights to demand an answer from the state, from the Office of Missing Persons, from the Truth Commission, about who is responsible for my loved one's disappearance. Because if it is the state, or if it's a paramilitary, then those people have the right to demand a criminal prosecution. They also have the right to claim damages from the state. So when you look at the way in which this is happening, it should never be at the expense of the rights of citizens. And more than that, it should not be seen as an acceptance of the figures that the government is giving, because that is an issue that still needs to be established. And so we have to be very, very careful. You see, what is happening is you have very sort of ad hoc processes. But do you have a common policy framework which says, this is what we're going to do, and this is how each of these mechanisms will be linking to each other? Because if you don't have that, it's a recipe for chaos, and what it will do ultimately is compromise the rights of people.
If you place the cards together, how this new government, the government which is pro-peace, which is seen as pro-peace, pro-West, pro-human rights, which sponsored the UN Human Rights Resolution. The Prime Minister at a function in Jaffna, where the UK Foreign Secretary also was present. In Jaffna, in Palali, at the Thai Pongal Festival, he said, many of those who have been missing or disappeared are not among the livings. Then he set up this office of the missing persons. Then they are issuing the certificates of absence. When you place these cards together, where this leads to? As you said that the particular clause while issuing this absence of certificate, you say that the right of the people to know what has happened to their people, or who is responsible for that. That right is not there. It's supposed to be. I think yesterday the former president was in charge of that, and she said this is to make sure that they have access to their bank accounts, reclaim their properties, and so on. But they are not particularly talking about how they disappeared and who is responsible. When you place these three things together, you think, because this will be seen by the foreign countries in the international community as positives of the government, like what they sang the national anthem in Tamil. That is also another tick box. For the people who have suffered in the hands of the government forces, what does that really mean?
Well, isn't that what should be the part of it should be part of the consultations with people? That's the question of who defines what is appropriate for people. It's one of the reasons why we carried out this consultation process outside of the country, because we thought it's really important to have the views of people on these different mechanisms. Now, the government has started this process, but it's an online process in Sri Lanka. And quite frankly, the government hasn't made resources available to the task group that is entrusted with carrying out consultations. But the primary group, and if you read the rapporteur's report, he makes the point that who should be consulted? The first people who should be consulted are the victims and their families. And so when we look at these different instruments, all of them have been conceived without any discussion with the victims. And these victims are mainly Tamil victims. So my challenge, I think, to the government and the international community is, before you design processes, go and ask the people who suffered what they want to see in these processes. Because when you construct these intermediate measures, you need to make sure that you are not compromising their rights. If you look at the working group on enforced disappearances, they also visited Sri Lanka last year. Based on much of the information that we gave them, they confirmed what we said in our report, particularly around Trincomalee. We put the names of the naval officers responsible in our report. Have you seen any follow-up action? So the point I think that I'm making is that why is there this rush to make sure that when they go to Geneva in March, they can say, we've done this, we've done this, we've done that. But who has done that? And have you consulted with people? In my country, for instance, it took 1 year in my country for the national consultations, because the government announced that they had committed to a particular deal. We didn't just accept what they said. With the government's help, we went down to the most rural parts of our country and we asked people, what do you think about this? What do you want these transitional justice bodies to actually deal with? And people have views and perspectives. If you read our report, which we launched today, you will hear what people have to say about this. And the single biggest element that emerges from the report is the lack of trust that people have in the government. What people are saying to us is, if the government is sincere, the OISL inquiry last year made a number of recommendations which they talked about as confidence-building measures, as preconditions. Why have none of them been addressed? The return of the land. If the single biggest question is, why can't the government get the military to return the land?
But the government has been returning some land, isn't it?
Yeah, but if you read the president's statement and the prime minister's, even he concedes that there's a huge amount of land that still has to be returned. The second is, why has the government not issued a public instruction to the security forces. We have a zero tolerance policy on abductions, on torture, on disappearances, and sexual violence.
The government doesn't accept that things has happened, and the Prime Minister has denied this is not happening under his government.
Exactly. So how can the security forces believe that they are going to have to deal with accountability if the leadership keeps telling them, don't worry? What people should be saying, the international community should be saying, there are 3 things you need to do. Implement the OISL recommendations immediately. Why has the PTA not yet been revamped? Why has the witness protection thing, which is inadequate, not been addressed? Why have they not dealt with the rest of the recommendations and issue this policy? So you see, my view is, and the views of many of the victims whom we've consulted, is that this is about saying to Geneva, we've done this, we've done this, we've done that. But the way in which it has been done is without consultation, or rather we should say the consultations have taken place with elites who have never experienced violations themselves. And the real question should be, are you consulting with the people on the ground who have been the victims of violations? And that's going to be the real test of how effective your transitional justice program will be.
So government is expected to give a verbal report on the implementation of the UN Human Rights Resolution, which is co-sponsored. They have sung national anthem in Tamil. The TNA, the main opposition party, that represents the Tamil people, have welcomed it. The leaders have taken part in the what do you call the independence celebrations. Office of the missing person has been set up. Consultation process has set up. Yeah, almost, we have a problem with the legal system or the constitution. We are redrafting the constitution. Consultation process has started. For the disappearances of 65,000 people, we are accepted. They are disappeared. We are issuing the absence of certificate of absence. So these things we are doing. We are still consulting. It's 25 years, 35 years of war. It needs time and space. Is the international community give them time and space again? What do you expect them to respond? How do you expect them to respond?
My view is that the international community should say to them, okay, you've done a number of things, but to be very frank, these are ticking boxes, and they really don't deal with the structural questions which exist, which continue to foster conflict in your country. And if I was a victim and I was the international community, I would say to them, as proof of your sincerity, why do you not enact within the constitutional reform process a constitutional guarantee that all of the transitional justice instruments will serve to deliver truth, justice, reparations, and the guarantee of non-recurrence? Because I think the important thing is to make sure that in ticking the boxes, you also bind not just this particular government, but future successive governments. And the only way in which you can do that is to include it in the Constitution. Otherwise, all you will get is every time they have to go to Geneva, you will tick, 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 but nobody will ask the question, how is this going to be implemented and what will it deliver on? And I think there's a very big question that Sri Lankans have to ask themselves. Next year in March, the government will deliver its final report to the Council. What is the Council's response going to be? Will they keep Sri Lanka on the agenda of the Council? Because if they don't, you can bet your bottom dollar that all of these processes will then slide off the table. But the single biggest test for the government is really around the question of security sector reform. If the government is not able to engage with the military, and this is what Pablo de Graaf has said, if you cannot give the military to demilitarize the north and east of the country, if they are not prepared to give people their land back, if they are not prepared to take off all their war monuments and to leave their war tourism in the area, how are you going to get them to face accountability for their crimes? That's the question.
Jasmine Suka, thanks for joining us. Actually, it's a pleasure having you at the show. நேரத நேர்களை இத்துடன் என்ற நிகழ்ச்சியை ரவிசது கொள்கிறோம். அதாவது இது எந்த நீதி பொறுமுறையாக இருந்தாலும் சரி, பேரளவுக்கு சில கட்டமைப்புகளை ஏற்படுத்தி விட்டு அதாவது எந்த நீதி பொறிமுறையாக இருந்தாலும் சரி, அது பாதிக்கப்பட்ட மக்கள், குறிப்பாக பாதிக்கப்பட்ட யுத்தத்தினால் பாதிக்கப்பட்ட தமிழ் மக்களுடனான அந்த கலந்துரையாடலின் பின்னர் தான் அவர்களுடைய விருப்பத்திற்கு ஏற்ப, அவர்களுடைய கருத்துக்களுக்கு ஏற்ப, அவர்களுடைய கருத்துக்களை பிரதிபலிக்கக்கூடியவையாக, அந்த நம்பிக்கை பெற்றவையாக அந்த பொறிமுறை அமையவில்லையாயின் இலங்கையில் நீதி, சமாதானம், நல்லிணக்கம் ஏற்பதற்கான வாய்ப்பு என்றுமே கிடையாது என்று தெரிவிக்கிறார் ஜாஸ்மின் சூக்கா அவர்கள். நல்லது நேயர்களே, இத்துடன் இந்த நிகழ்ச்சியை நிறைவு செய்து கொள்கிறோம். மற்றொரு நிகழ்ச்சியை சந்திக்கும் வரை உங்களோடு விடைபெற்றுக் கொண்டு நான் வி. கருணாகரன். நன்றி, வணக்கம்.